Institutional aggression in the context of prisons. Institutional aggression is aggression that takes place as a result of being in an institution setting such as a prison or armed forces. The dispositional explanation. The importation model claims that inmates enter prison with a set of certain characteristics which make them more likely to engage in aggressive behaviour. For example, beliefs about race, values, attitudes, and age. According to this theory, violence in prison is not a product of the institution itself, but the characteristics of the individuals that are in the institution. The use of aggression inside a prison. Aggression is used to establish power, status, and access to resources. Research support with juvenile delinquents. Researchers studied juvenile delinquents in California institutions who imported several negative dispositional features, for example, childhood trauma, anger, histories of substance abuse, and violent behaviour. Findings showed that the inmates in the study were likely to engage in suicidal activity and sexual misconduct and committed more acts of physical violence brought to the attention of the parole board compared with a control group of inmates with fewer negative dispositional features. This suggests that institutional aggression results from characteristics in the prison of the prisoner and not the institution itself. This increases the validity of the importation model of explaining institutional aggression. However, a methodological strength. A methodological strength is that it was a field study. Field studies take place in a natural setting where the researcher manipulates the independent variable and records its effect on the dependent variable. This makes them very high in mundane realism as they can produce behaviour which is more authentic. This increases the external validity of the research and its support into dispositional characteristics. The situational explanation. Whereas the deprivation model claims that it is the characteristics of the prison itself rather than prison population that accounts for prison violence. So heat, noise, heterosexual intimacy, overcrowding, and even boredom. They argue that it is the experience of the imprisonment that causes inmates extreme stress and frustration, which in turn leads to violence or aggression against other inmates and staff. Aggression can also appear due to the nature of the prison regime, such as lockup, to control behaviour which again causes frustration, boredom, and prevents access to goods. Contradictory research. The deprivation model predicts that a lack of freedom and heterosexual contact leads to high levels of aggression in prisons. There is evidence that refutes this claim. Researchers studied inmates of prisons allowing conjugal visits, i.e. to have sex. Findings revealed that there's no link between involvement in these visits and reduced aggressive behaviour. This suggests that situational factors don't necessarily affect prison violence. This weakens the validity and the support of the deprivation model of institutional aggression. A strength is taking an interactionist model. There are strengths and limitations that surround each of the models individually. However, psychologists have proposed that combining both the deprivation and importation model serves as a more holistic explanation of institutional aggression in prisons. Researchers argue in favour of an interactionist model. Inmates entering prison for the first time will suffer deprivation. However, deprivation doesn't necessarily lead to violence unless it is combined with the individual characteristics imported into the prison by inmates and which influence the prison's culture. This makes the interactionist model a more appropriate explanation for explaining institutional aggression.